This is Steve Schuckman, Superintendent of Planning and Design for Cincinnati Parks, and I'm going to talk about our capital improvement needs. Starting with the mission. The Park Board's mission is about conservation and management and enhancement of our cultural resources. The park system as we know it today is built on the shoulders of the original master plan for parks that was done in 1907. And it was a vision of hilltop parks connected by parkways and boulevards. Today, the park system is comprised of over 5,000 acres of green space, and this is about 10% of the city's total land area. The system consists of over 120 park buildings, 50 miles of roadways, 56 playgrounds, and the entire infrastructure of utilities, walks, roads, and retaining walls. In addition to these resources, our infrastructure includes green infrastructure, our woodlands, floral beds, and landscapes. The infrastructure of parks dates largely from the 1930s and 1940s, and it gives us a distinctive visual look and character. However, because of the age of this infrastructure, 70, 80 years old and older, we've got the responsibility to continually maintain and renovate. Our current master plan was adopted by City Council in September 2007 on the 100th anniversary of the original master plan. The vision of the master plan can be defined in several statements. One is it envisioned a network of parkways and greenways linking open spaces. It also saw parks as providing a natural setting for the community's outdoor leisure activities as well as our education and growth. Called for enrichment through programs, events, and services. And finally, we have a vision of distinctive parklands, beautifully designed and landscaped. Major recommendations of the master plan included achieving a sustainable system. It called for a balance of free and fee facilities. The plan also called for a single regional entity to plan, design, build, and maintain trails. The plan called for a stabilization of our operating budget by not creating a new tax, but simply designating a part of the existing operating budget for parks. The plan also called for reforesting parks, protecting natural resources, carrying out key capital improvements, and particularly partnering and leveraging public dollars. The improvements and costs for all of this and specific amounts from various funding sources were laid out in the plan. The capital improvement component of the plan was preceded by and has been followed by long-range planning and budgeting as part of the city budget process. The plan called for renovations and replacements as well as new facilities and new park elements. All in all, for the first 10 years of the plan, from 2007 to 2016, the plan called for $86 million of city capital improvement funding. A lot was achieved with this $27 million over the last decade. However, this is $59 million less than was called for in the master plan over the first 10 years. Year by year, our appropriations are shown. In the first 5 years of the plan, parks received between $3 and about $3.5 million a year for capital improvements. However, since 2012, that has declined, reaching a low point in 2014 of just $1.3 million. It should be noted, even with this shortfall and with the $86 million called for in the master plan, there have been new initiatives, new things come along the line that we learn about. In 2011, as an example, Council shifted control of the downtown waterfront parks from recreation to parks, so that all those capital needs and all the deferred maintenance needs weren't originally anticipated in the budget. The master plan broke that down into specific categories. For example, over $10.5 million for buildings, for structures over $4 million, and even outlined the needs at individual parks such as Washington Park, which of course has been accomplished, and Burnett Woods and Inwood Park, which has not yet been accomplished. Many of the improvements that were done with those $27 million occurred in neighborhood parks throughout the city. It included Owl's Nest Park in Evanston, Olden View and East Price Hill, and the parks in Avondale and Corryville. Kennedy Heights and Northside. Some examples include Olden View Park, that served as a catalyst for development of the Incline District in East Price Hill, Geyer Park, which was expanded and renovated and is a focus for the business district in Oakley, and Owl's Nest Park in Evanston. Other achievements in the last 10 years included creating new master plans. And these include a new master plan developed with the community for Ziegler Park. That money is in place and construction soon to start. We also did plans for the Business District Park, Montgomery Triangle, and Pleasant Ridge, Lytle Park, and other parks throughout the city. Parks has also worked with MSD on numerous green infrastructure projects. We've worked with regional partners in developing a regional bike trail plan, and a plan was recently completed to link all the bike trails within the city limits. We've also expanded our volunteer opportunities, worked with the Parks Foundation and over 24 park advisory councils. We've conducted land management activities such as eradicating honeysuckle, though funds have not been adequate to really meet that need, and we've created many energy conservation projects. We also, with the limited dollars we have, seek private dollars and grants to leverage public dollars. But in the end, there still have been significant shortfalls of available capital funding annually. Still to be achieved, as called for in the master plan, is moving from downtown and the Basin area up to the second biggest employment area for the city, Uptown. There are plans for 6 Uptown parks, but funding hasn't been there to carry those out. A master plan developed with the community for Lytle Park has not yet been funded. We've also had inadequate funds to address invasive species, to really deal with park operations and services, and there's as yet still no single entity to carry out design, construction, and importantly maintenance for the bike trail system. Staffing has been inadequate to operate the system, to renovate hiking trails. We've got a backlog of capital improvements, and of course there have not been funds to do major new initiatives such as additions at Crone and new facilities at Mount Airy Forest. The Park Board continually monitors our infrastructure needs and budgets for city capital improvements annually to meet master plan needs and new emerging needs. Today we're going to look at some of the infrastructure needs in the park system. It's really a kind of cross-section of a number of needs. We're looking at one of the great historic buildings in the park system. This is the Inwood Park Pavilion. It dates from 1904. It's a great building, but as you can see, it has lots of needs. Part of the problem with the building, in addition to its deterioration, is that right now there isn't a designated use for it, and so we've needed to secure it. People have gotten into the building, and that's something we want to prevent. Inwood Park is a series of terraces, and we're at the first terrace above Vine Street. We're going to look at some of the furnishings here. This is a retaining wall that also serves as a seat wall in Inwood behind the pavilion. Lots of retaining walls in the park system, and also step systems, since so many of the parks are on hillsides. We're looking at a wall that's been collapsing and broken railing at Jackson Hill Park in Mount Auburn. We're in Burno Woods Park. We're going to look at some deteriorating blacktop. Here it's a sidewalk that is kind of going back to nature. We're going to look at some more problems with curbs and streets here. A lot of the roadway in Burno Woods is falling apart, and it gets to the point that patching potholes isn't enough, and we'll have to rebuild sections of road. We're at Burno Woods Lake, and behind me is a trail along the lake. It's a natural trail. It's in pretty good shape. The problem is where it transitions here to the walk, the blacktop and concrete walk along the lake. So it's a tripping hazard. It's also a problem because of the water that drains off the hillside, so this is perennially wet. So this is something that, if we had the funds, that we would need to fix. We're looking at steps in Burno Woods that come down from Bishop Street, And part of the problem here is that water comes down the hillside. It's eroded the hillside, it's exposed the underside of the steps and the landing, and it's even exposed a pipe. This is a step system in Fairview Park. It's a series of steps, where there used to be steps, going from Lower Fairview Park at McMicken up to the Park Road and then all the way up to Fairview Avenue. We're at the amphitheater and walkway behind Music Hall. It's at the corner of Ezra Charles and Central Parkway. You can see there's lots of deteriorating concrete at the plaza, the walkway itself, and the brick amphitheater. In 2011, City Council transferred the downtown waterfront parks from the Recreation Commission to the Park Board. The Park Board at that point was building Smale Riverfront Park to our west, and we already had Theodore Berry International Friendship Park to the east. But the parks in between then, for greater efficiency, were transferred to parks. That includes the Public Landing, Yeatman's Cove, and Bicentennial Commons and Sawyer Point. And some of what we're going to be looking at includes problems that were really deferred maintenance from many years before it even came over to parks. This is one of the features at Bicentennial Commons at Sawyer Point, and this is a geologic timeline, and it's a wonderful feature with the various ages and symbols carved in granite. Only a number of those granite blocks have cracked over the years. This is one of the features at Sawyer Point that we call a fishing pier, and the concrete deck is supported on a steel superstructure. Part of the steel is significantly deteriorated and is going to need to be replaced. This is the Ohio River Trail. It's part of the bike trail along the Ohio River. It's actually part of the Ohio to Erie Trail, which will eventually extend from downtown Cincinnati at Smale all the way up to downtown Cleveland. The problem with this part of the trail is it still has embedded within it the old railroad tracks, and there just hasn't been funding to take the tracks out since they're a hazard to bike riders. We've got 56 playgrounds throughout the park system, and they have a lifespan of maybe 15 years. It could be 10 to 15, even 20 years in equipment, but many of them have a rubberized safety surface, and those we're doing well for those to last 10 years. Generally, if they're not vandalized, they will wear and crack, and they need to be patched or replaced. It could be as often as every 6 or 7 years. We're looking at a pavilion shelter at Owl's Nest Park in Evanston, and the building's long been out of use. There used to be a swimming pool at this site operated by Recreation. The pool was removed when we renovated the park, so there was no longer a need for the bathhouse. But as you can see, the building is showing some structural problems, and it's getting to the point that when we have funding, we'll need to demolish the building. We've just seen a small sampling of our capital improvement needs throughout the park system. We're talking about a 5,000-acre system. It's filled with wonderful historic sites, over 120 buildings, but 60% of those buildings are over 50 years old. We've got miles of roadways and walks and retaining walls. And so again, we've just seen a few of the examples of our infrastructure needs. Because there have been limited capital improvement dollars, we always need to conduct a kind of triage with our infrastructure, and these are based on city and park board priorities. These priorities include eliminating hazards, meeting legal and regulatory mandates, when there's multiple phase projects, completing phases, certainly trying to prevent failure of assets and extend the useful life of our infrastructure assets, looking at cost benefits such as job retention, cost savings, and service betterments. And also we look at facilities that generate revenue, projects that can leverage further investment and development, and those projects that serve the most users, such as regional parks and regional facilities. We've developed updated costs for all our buildings, all our roadways, all our walks and playgrounds. And all these costs are derived from a series of sources. These sources include our records of prior replacement renovation costs, our experience working with contractors and consultants, specific infrastructure audits, specific project planning, and then industry standards looking at life cycle costs. All these costs are based on certain assumptions about the longevity of various infrastructure elements. These elements are broken down such as buildings by the value of the building, the square footage and the age of each building, but also all of our lighting systems, our circulation systems, which is to say roads and parking lots, walkways and steps and trails, our utilities and lighting systems, and our playgrounds. Costs look at both short and long-term kinds of work. Short and mid-term work is generally for elements that have a longevity of up to 10 years, and then we also factor in longer-term needs. Life cycles are generating a lot of our budget needs, but also master planning and facility planning drives specific costs of parks and park facility renovations when we do master planning. Life cycles also extend to our furnishings, which is the term we use for picnic tables, trash cans and benches, railings and grills. We also have over 30 sculptures and monuments, and these need to be cleaned, repatinated, and maintained. And all of our structures, which includes retaining walls, bridges, concrete-lined ponds, and our green infrastructure of landscapes and trees. The renovation costs, recycling, life cycle costs are different for different elements. We also have to look at factors such as heavy public use, unforeseen problems that we have to deal with when we have problems with utilities such as water line breaks and sewer breaks that we can't really know about ahead of time. And we also look at the extent of maintenance for various elements that they receive annually, and that needs to be factored in. The shorter-term building systems include interior painting, HVAC systems, pumps and motors, and these again have a life cycle of about 10 years. Then we look at the longer-term building fabric, the roofs of buildings, the walls, windows, and doors, and those life cycles come to about 30 years. Looking at the costs for building renovation for short-term, we've assumed 20% of the replacement cost of a building is tied to these building systems. We also assume that 30% of the replacement cost is related to the building elements, that building fabric of roofs, doors, windows, and walls. And these are on a 30-year cycle. Life cycles extend to concrete walks that have a life of 20 to 25 years, roadways, playgrounds. Playground equipment can last 10 to 15 years, but rubberized play surfaces have a life expectancy of maybe 10 years, but often need patching or replacement after 5 or 6 years. We assume the 50% of the replacement cost over a 20-year life cycle for replacing walks and steps. For trails, we know it costs $80,000 per mile for rebuilding trails, and another $2,000 per mile per year to keep them cleared and well maintained. Our long-range budget calls for over $380,000 a year for trail rebuilding and renovation, though we don't get anything close to that and don't really expect to. But if we did get this would take care of just under 5 miles of trails a year. But with 65 miles of trails at this rate, it would take over 13 years to renovate the entire trail system. Swings, playground structures all have their own life cycles and expectancies, and that's built into the cost for replacement. An example for playgrounds is a small swing set was as much as $18,000 a year to replace. A large playground with rubberized surfaces would cost $120,000 to $140,000. Utilities and lighting systems also have their own life cycles and all require annual maintenance. As an example, a small-sized park with typical pedestrian scale post-top lights can cost $200,000 to $300,000 for a new lighting system. And again, there's the green infrastructure. We look at over 1,500 acres of parkland that today is being choked out by honeysuckle. Our honeysuckle removal costs are over $5,600 per acre. Our long-range budget calls for over $400,000 annually, which would eradicate about 70 acres a year. If adequate maintenance is not provided, future capital improvement costs would certainly rise. In the end, the only way to preserve this historic legacy, our nationally ranked park system, is to receive sufficient annual capital improvement funds. We cannot hope to renovate, replace, or maintain our rapidly aging infrastructure without it. This is Steve Schuckman, Superintendent of Planning and Design for Cincinnati Parks. Thanks for listening.